Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Your old pal Federchuck is here, and today, without any unnecessary preamble, I want to tell you the story of one of the most fascinating armored vehicles of World War II, the Ferdinand tank destroyer, a machine that became truly legendary, especially on the Eastern Front, where it earned a fearsome reputation during the Battle of Kursk, one of the largest armored clashes in human history. Only 90 vehicles from the 653rd and 654th Heavy Tank Destroyer Battalions took part in the German offensive, and yet, in the memoirs of Soviet soldiers and officers, and even generals, Ferdinands seem to appear everywhere, burning by the hundreds. But we'll get to the myths a bit later. On the other hand, some Western and online enthusiasts love to attribute to the Ferdinand outrageous numbers of destroyed Soviet tanks, hundreds, sometimes even thousands. And in those tall tales, every one of them is, of course, a T-34. The story of this future tank destroyer began on October 14, 1942, when production of the Porsche-designed Tiger, the Panzerkampfwagen 6P, was halted after only 10 chassis had been built. Only one of those chassis actually reached the front as a Tiger P. Some books claim that Ferdinand Porsche believed his tank would definitely enter mass production, and almost independently ordered the manufacture of 91 chassis. But that's not really true. By late 1942, the German Ordnance Office still hadn't decided which heavy tank design would enter full production. Two competing heavy tanks were being built in parallel, the Henschel Tiger and the Porsche Tiger. The Henschel design had a powerful patron, Heinrich Kniepkamp, the influential head of the 6th Department of the Ordnance Office. Kniepkamp essentially oversaw the tank's development personally. Porsche, however, had lost his main supporter. On February 8, 1942, the Reich Minister of Armaments, Fritz Todt, died in a plane crash. Todt had always backed Porsche. His successor, Albert Speer, was brilliant in his role, but he didn't extend Porsche the same level of personal patronage. Speer had more than enough work on his plate. As a result, the Porsche Tiger did not enter mass production, but a number of chassis had already been manufactured, and Germany needed to use them for something. The solution? Turn them into a brand new heavy tank destroyer, armed with the powerful 88mm PaK 43 L71, one of the most formidable anti-tank guns of the war. Initially, designers considered installing this gun on the reliable and, as precise as a Swiss watch, Panzer IV chassis. But the idea was quickly discarded. The gun's size and recoil were simply too much. The Porsche chassis became the natural choice. Development of the vehicle began in late September 1942. The suspension from the Porsche Tiger was kept, but the entire internal layout changed dramatically. The enormous gun required a long and heavy armored casemate at the rear of the vehicle. The engines and generators, previously mounted in the back, were moved to the middle section of the hull. By December 28, 1942, the prototype was ready and approved, with one condition: reduce the weight. Engineers managed to do that. In January 1943, the Alcat factory began converting the first two Porsche Tiger chassis into tank destroyers. These prototypes received the designation 8.8 centimeters Stuck 43 SFL L71P. In February, the vehicle was officially given a new name, Ferdinand, in honor of Dr. Ferdinand Porsche. The hulls of the previously built Porsche Tigers were modernized at the Oberdenau plant in Linz, Austria. The massive armored casemate was manufactured by the Krupp Company, and final assembly took place at the Nibelungenwerke factory. The first vehicles were trialed at the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds in early April 1943. Porsche himself attended the tests. On April 20th, the machine was presented to Adolf Hitler, and he liked the new toy. By late June, 90 Ferdinands had been completed, with one chassis remaining at the factory. And so a total of 91 vehicles existed. So let's take a closer look at the Ferdinand itself. The vehicle was built on the Porsche Tiger chassis. The side plates and frontal armor were connected using interlocking joints, welded both inside and out using arc welding. When the hulls were converted, the sloped rear side plates were cut away from the inside, and in their place, 80mm armor extensions were welded. These lined up with the hull's sides and allowed the massive rear casemate to sit on a flat, reinforced surface. The front hull armor saw the biggest changes. The original frontal plates were reinforced with 100mm supplemental armor plates, bolted on with massive 38mm hardened, bullet-resistant bolt heads. The upper part of this added armor was also welded to the main plate. Openings for the old Porsche Tiger's hull machine gun and driver's visor were welded shut from the inside using armored plugs, though not on every vehicle. This can be clearly seen on the Ferdinand that Soviet specialists test-fired using the 152mm ML-20 howitzer. For 1943, the armor protection was extreme. Upper glacis plus front casemate plate, 200mm. Lower glacis, 85mm at 42 degrees. Side armor, 85mm. Rear armor, 85mm. Hull bottom, 30mm under the driver's compartment, 20mm further back. This made the front practically impervious to any Allied or Soviet anti-tank gun of the time, except at point-blank range or with large-caliber artillery. From the front, the Ferdinand looked like a solid wall of armor, nothing but thick steel and 2 towing hooks. Machine gun ports would appear later, only on the Elefant modernization. On the sloped cheeks flanking the front plate were the vision ports for the driver and radio operator. On early Ferdinands, they remained open. On Elefants, the left one was welded shut. The driver's roof hatch had 3 periscopes, offering surprisingly good visibility for an enclosed tank destroyer. The radio operator had a second hatch on the right, and between the 2 front hatches was a travel lock for the massive gun barrel. Behind them sat the engine deck with air intake grills, toolboxes, spare track links, Pioneer tools, and tow cables mounted on the fenders. On the rear hull plate sat a large tool compartment and heavy towing hooks. The rear casemate itself was a huge armored block. 200mm front plate, 85mm sides, 30mm roof. And the casemate front plate was attached to the hull using 8 large reinforcing brackets. The gun mantle was protected by an octagonal 80mm plate, bolted with 8 38mm bolts. Later, crews added improvised shields after tests showed that small fragments could sneak in around the edges of the gun mount. Drainage pipes on each side helped remove water, a simple but effective solution by German engineers. The rear casemate hatch was enormous, used for crew exit, used for removing the gun, and it had a small central hatch for loading ammunition. There were also pistol ports on both sides and the rear. on the roof, gunner's hatch on the left, commander's double hatch on the right, later replaced with a full cupola on the Elefant. Ventilation dome in the center, 2 side vents for periscopes. Now we come to the heart of the Ferdinand, the 88mm PAK-43L71, one of the greatest anti-tank guns of World War II. Mounted inside the casemate as the Stuck 43, it fired armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating 159 millimeters of armor at 2,000 meters. In plain English, it could destroy any Allied tank, American, British, or Soviet, at distances where those tanks often couldn't even fire back effectively. The only exception was the IS-2 heavy tank, whose extremely thick frontal armor could withstand a direct hit at very close range. But the turret and the lower front plate were still vulnerable. The gun weighed 2.2 tons, had 22 recoil absorption elements, and used a semi-automatic vertical breech. The gunner sat to the left with a 5x scope. Rate of fire, 8 to 9 rounds per minute. Ammunition was stored along the casemate walls, with 38 rounds in standard racks, plus improvised wooden racks noted by Soviet inspectors. The Ferdinand used one of the most unusual drivetrains of the war, 2 Maybach HL120 TRM gasoline engines, 12-cylinder each, 265 horsepower per engine, mounted side by side. These engines powered 2 Siemens electric generators, which in turn powered 2 Siemens electric traction motors. This Porsche electric drive system allowed extremely smooth acceleration and produced impressive torque, ideal for a 65-ton vehicle. Each engine had its own cooling system, its own fuel supply, its own lubrication and control system. Fuel tanks, 540 liters each. Top speed, 30 to 35 kilometers per hour on road. Range, approximately 150 kilometers. The transmission was entirely electric, complicated and maintenance-heavy, but surprisingly reliable when properly serviced. The suspension was mounted externally, not inside the hull. 3 bogies per side. Each bogie had 2 large road wheels. Longitudinal torsion bars, unusual by German standards. The drive sprockets were at the rear, with replaceable toothed rings. Idlers were at the front. A major drawback was that the engine's exhaust blasted directly toward the 5th road wheel, causing overheating and more frequent failures of that wheel and its bearings. The tracks were massive, 640 millimeters wide, heavy, durable steel links, connected with large track pins. The Ferdinand had a 6-man crew. Front compartment, driver, left, radio operator/machine gunner, right, MG added on Elefant modernization. Radio equipment, FUG-5 set for battalion vehicles, FUG-8 added to company/battalion command vehicles. Casemate compartment, gunner left of the gun, commander right of the gun, 2 loaders rear. The commander's work was difficult on early Ferdinands. He had no cupola and had to expose himself to observe the battlefield. The later Elefant fixed this with a proper commander's cupola. In its intended role as a heavy, long-range tank destroyer, the Ferdinand was nothing short of extraordinary. Its strengths were undeniable. A devastating 88mm PAK-43 L71 gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank, Soviet, American, or British, at distances of 1.5 to 2 kilometers. Massive 200mm frontal armor, practically immune to any anti-tank weapon of 1943. Even the fearsome Soviet IS-2 struggled to penetrate it frontally. Veteran, highly trained crews, reassigned from earlier assault gun and anti-tank units, many with years of frontline experience. Surprisingly reliable systems. Despite the legend of Ferdinand being mechanically fragile, the electric transmission actually performed well when properly maintained, and most losses came from mines, not breakdowns. Psychological impact. Both Soviet and Allied soldiers often mislabeled any large German vehicle as a Ferdinand. This only added to the machine's aura of fear. However, the Ferdinand also had serious drawbacks, some design-related, others stemming from how commanders used it. No hull machine gun on early models. This made close-quarters combat extremely dangerous. Crews relied heavily on friendly infantry. Enormous weight and mobility issues. It was difficult to maneuver in mud or poor terrain. Once immobilized, it was very likely to be abandoned or destroyed. High profile and lack of turret. A massive silhouette and limited arcs of fire required careful positioning. And most importantly, misemployment. Commanders often used the Ferdinand like a breakthrough tank, which it was not. This misunderstanding led to heavy losses at Kursk, where planning mistakes, poor reconnaissance, and minefields caused more destruction than enemy guns. In the end, the story of the Ferdinand, later the Elefant, is the story of a weapon ahead of its time, used in a war that demanded impossible performance from every machine and every soldier. With only 91 vehicles ever built, the Ferdinand was never destined to change the course of the war. But every battlefield it touched, from Kursk to Anzio, from Rome to the last defensive lines of Germany in 1945, felt its presence. A giant of steel, feared by its enemies, misunderstood by its own command, and remembered long after the smoke of war cleared. And with that, we bring this story to a close. If you have your own thoughts about the Ferdinand, the myths, the legends, the real history behind this massive machine, feel free to share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more history brought to life. As always, this was your old friend, wishing you peace in your home and clear skies above.